What's up, friends? Welcome back to the lab. I'm your host, the Mad Scientist, and then today's scientific findings that we're going to talk about today, we're going to go over the cores of our surfboard. Here's something that really pisses me off and annoys the living shit out of me is somebody that would come into the factory when we were there and would say, I have a fiberglass board or I have an epoxy board. Well, friend, you are talking about having a poly board or an epoxy board. I'm well aware that there are boards out there that are not made with fiberglass. Cool. But the most common ones are going to be a poly board or an epoxy board. Let's just get that out of the way. I had to do it because it bothers me. So today we're going to talk about poly boards and epoxy boards. It's the core of them, the foam. The foam of a poly board is actually a poly foam and it's glassed with poly resin. Now, sometimes I glass them with epoxy. Cool. An epoxy board is an EPS foam and it's going to be glassed in epoxy. You cannot glass an EPS core board with poly. It's like putting super glue on styrofoam. It's just going to eat away at it and melt it completely. Back to this. Poly. This is the gold standard of the surfboard world, is a poly blank with poly resin. This foam is a lot more dense and it's going to traditionally have a wood stringer down the center of it. The thicker the stringer, the stiffer the board is going to be. You need that on longer boards. You need to be stiffer and have a stronger spine. But on the short boards here, we want a thinner stringer to allow a little bit more maneuverability. Now check this out. This is the fun part. This is why you came to school today. Let's do some CPR on this guy. You see the amount of flex that this board has? And I am genuinely pushing pretty hard on this. It's like I'm doing CPR at work, but you see the flex here? This is giving it a good go. Poly boards are more dense foam and they have the stringer, the spine of the board, that's actually reducing the amount of flex going down. This style core is really good at giving you that predictability that you want when you're surfing. So you'll hear traditionally people say a poly board is predictable and an EPS epoxy board is more erratic. This is why. A more dense foam and the stringer running all the way through it is going to stiffen this board up a little bit. This is great on choppy days. This is great with natural speed as well. This has more glide because it has more weight. This board is easier to repair and more inexpensive as far as materials go, building them. This is why they're the gold standard of surfing. People love them because they're predictable. That's probably the most common reason to go poly board here. So this guy is the gold standard. Now, let's talk about EPS epoxy boards here, bringing out this bad boy. This guy right here is like that ADHD kid that just had a whole bunch of sugar and is just on one. That is EPS. And I think that goes in line with my personality a little bit too, because I personally love EPS boards more than poly boards. That's my own opinion. You might have a different one, but check the flex out on this one. I'm not even pushing that hard as I was on that poly board over there. Now look at the amount of flex you have here. Now, the fact that we don't have a stringer running down the center of it is really equating to the flex. I get that, but the foam is less dense in comparison to the poly foam here. This EPS foam, being less dense, is going to give you more buoyancy and more spring. So that's why I said it's like that erratic kid, because this board is going to stay on top of the water. He's going to sink down into the water a little bit more. That's where him in choppy conditions is better than him in choppy conditions, because he sinks and reduces that chop a little bit more. This guy chatters and stays on top, which makes this a really good board on cleaner and smaller surf. It's very springy, it's very lively, and wrap that in epoxy, which has a little bit better memory in it compared to poly, and wood versus carbon fiber, which you're typically going to wrap this guy in, is going to spring back a lot faster. So when you ride an EPS core board, you feel it wind up. And then as you start to initiate your turn, you kind of feel it spring forward, or you feel yourself up on top of the wave a little bit more. This is why this board actually ends up being more popular on smaller surf in comparison to this guy here. But those are the typical cores of your standard surfboard there. EPS epoxy, poly. That's all you need to know, man. And that concludes our lesson in cores of the surfboard. Yewwww!